Talia Khan, thank you for joining me as Startup Nation United. It's a special, very special, different episode than what we usually do. We're here on MIT's campus, and it's November 6th today, I believe. 5th? 7th already. Okay. Time is lost during everything that's happening now. We're just over a month into the war. Your work in the consideration of the war and your experience here, springing into action immediately, the organization you helped form, and you're leading MIT Israel Alliance on October 9th, so just 2 days after the war. But before we get into what's happening here on campus and in general in the U.S., I'd love to hear a little bit about you. What do you do outside of the war? And you're a graduate student here. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm a graduate student here at MIT in mechanical engineering. I also did my undergrad at MIT in material science and engineering and music. I'm a second year, and I study sustainable structural materials. I do a lot of mechanics of materials work, both experimental work and computational work.
And the connection with music?
I'm a singer, so I did a double major in music undergrad.
Wow, yeah. That's incredible. Okay, so you've been already here for quite some time at MIT. Yeah. In general, October 7th, going back to that very difficult day, here I guess it was at nighttime, right?
Yeah.
When everything transpired.
Yeah.
It was Friday night.
Yeah, so I found out about what happened on Saturday, like about midday on Shabbat. And we didn't know a lot because it was Shabbat. So people were just hearing snippets and stuff. So we didn't find out. I mean, of course, over the next few days, we found out a lot more. But we were all just pretty confused and scared and just in shock on that day.
What's happening? Are people just on their phones, refreshing the news, or what's sort of the energy that's going around here during this confusing few days?
So I guess on Shabbat, I was at MIT Chabad, so we have a Chabad on campus, and everyone there was just, trying to understand what was going on from those who knew more, and also just, I think there was just a lot of emotion. I cried, and I think people were just in shock. People didn't know what to believe. It sounds unbelievable that this happened. And then I guess over the next few days, it was just a mixture of emotions. People also weren't, on their phones for the next day for Simchat Torah. And then, it was just as people were getting information, people were processing everything very differently. And I think there's just a lot of shock that this could happen.
And outside of the Israeli Jewish community, what was the immediate reception from others? Because obviously here we're...
Yeah, so immediately, so I guess the whole community of MIT and the Boston Cambridge community didn't necessarily say much. I think for a lot of people, this is just another conflict far away that they don't know that much about and don't necessarily care about. However, we have a group on campus called the Coalition Against Apartheid, which is an anti-Israel group. And they immediately started posting things on social media, such as the image I'm sure you've seen of the Hamas fighter on top of an Israeli tank, and talking about the resistance and freedom fighters. And this was immediately before anything happened, before any IDF soldier stepped foot in Gaza. So there's already that going on, and they already started planning these rallies and events. And they most recently had a die-in where they pretended to be dead Palestinians. So there's been a lot of...
Excuse me, a die-in?
A die-in. So instead of a sit-in, they were lying down on the ground with the names of Palestinians who were reported to be dead, and to raise awareness for their cause. They did this in the middle of Lobby 7, which is the main hall at MIT. So students going to classes saw this. And they've done this, but they've also done lots of loud, large rallies. And this is not just students coming to these rallies. The other people who come to these rallies are people in the community, outside of Cambridge, in Boston, and they have some sort of a network that brings all of these people together. And they yell for Intifada. They yell from the river to the sea. They talk about Israel committing genocide, apartheid, ethnic cleansing, colonization, et cetera, et cetera. They called for one solution, Intifada, right over there, which for a lot of Jewish and Israeli students on campus, the idea of one solution reminds us only of the final solution. So when they chant one solution, Intifada, on our campus, you can imagine how a lot of Jewish students were really afraid and felt really uncomfortable by, their activism on campus.
We saw the different publications talking about the Jewish fear by youth and students. That's something that you felt here. The youth that it was a sense. It was I would imagine that if I were here there, that I would feel that way. And when I'm looking at, this is not a traditional area of protest. This is not a traditional building that we're in or traditional campus. We're at MIT. We're prestigious university. I was just at Stanford Mile a few days ago, and I saw posters on the ground, stomped on, and there's a significance to the place that we're in, what it represents intellectually, ethically, for the community of the world, for the United States. How do you perceive it? This also the responsibility, perhaps even of an institution like not just MIT, but in general, like the top tier intellectual places in the US of the world in relation to this conflict and what is expected and what is not expected.
Yeah, well, I guess in terms of the university's perspective, I think that you're seeing from a lot of these higher level universities that they're kind of trying to
navigate.
Yes. They're saying no to anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, even though we're not seeing any Islamophobia. So I think we've been very frustrated by that with MIT's administration, but it is understandable that they, have to keep a lot in mind, especially because, the microscope is right on them. I think personally, as you were talking about, I certainly felt a responsibility as an MIT student who has been here for so long, and I guess seeing the way that so many people have via TikTok, Instagram, etc., been so easily influenced by this anti-Israel propaganda. I felt very responsible to start the MIT Israel Alliance with many other colleagues who are on the same page as me, because we want to make sure, the people who graduate from MIT are going to be the next tech leaders. They're going to be the next leaders in science and biotech, the next financial leaders of the world. So it's our responsibility to make sure that these future leaders don't have these anti-Israel biases or sentiments, and that if they're hearing this online or in person, that they're also hearing, our message, our narrative, and they're also seeing, our perspective on this conflict.
I mean, this is really sort of a beacon, right? This is a lighthouse for the world, one of the few lighthouses. And I would imagine that every word that's being spoken out of MIT's campus, whether it's by a student, faculty member, or an administrator, it carries weight. It carries weight on social media and the way that anybody else. It gives legitimacy to certain types of behavior. And I think what you mentioned before, and what resonates a lot with me, putting aside any political perspective at all, having an experience where a group of people, and particularly given that I'm one of those people, is experiencing an internal fear, and it's such a beacon of hope and intellectual prestige. I think that's just a big moment to realize, and I think that's why it's even more powerful, the place that we are, and even more relevant what we're talking about. October 9th hits, 2 days into the conflict. MIT Israel Alliance choosing the name and choosing and what is that? What is it all about? Tell me about this whole thing.
Yeah. So as happened all around the world, 1 million WhatsApp groups were formed, and people wanted to poster. The kidnapping posters were kind of coming out, and people were sending these around. But as many universities have, MIT has rules on where you can poster. You have to, for example, say who you are if you put a poster up, what the date is that you posted. There's a lot of rules around this, and bureaucracy. And also hosting events and things, like a rally. We had a rally and a community vigil the week after. And so in order to organize all this stuff, instead of having 50 WhatsApp groups, we were like, okay, let's make a club. Let's have an executive board. Let's have point people in charge of certain things. So we have, a social media postering chair. We have an events coordinator. We have an education coordinator, treasurer, etc. And a lot of people came together. And this is, I think what's special about the Israel Alliance is that it's a lot of people who, it's not just the people who are already active in the Jewish or Israeli community. There were people who, before October 7th, identified as Jewish and would say like, oh, I'm Jewish, whatever. So they didn't really care about Israel, maybe even had negative opinions about Israel. But when October 7th hit, that's when a lot of people realized if Israel didn't exist, this would happen. This would happen all over the world. And there would be no place for us to be safe. And I had many people come to me and say, like, before this, I hated Israel. I thought Israel was an oppressive, colonialist, whatever. But now I understand why Israel has to exist. And those people joined the MITIA. And I think that we all agreed that the main focus is education. We're not here to yell and call names, like many of the pro-Palestinian activists do. Or I shouldn't say pro-Palestinian. I should say pro-Hamas. Right. And so, yeah, many of the pro-Hamas people are yelling. They're violent. So our goal is not to do that. It's just not our style. As MIT people, as Jewish people,
how does one navigate now that there's pro-Hamas around?
It's hard. I personally had to leave.
Do they understand what they're doing? What they're advocating for when they're pro-Hamas?
I think it totally depends on the person. I think some people do. Some people who, whatever, I won't try and make guesses about people's backgrounds, whatever, but I think some people do know exactly what they're saying. But I think the vast majority of these kids on college campuses just heard something from their friend or just saw something on TikTok and are like, oh yeah, I guess Israel's supposed to be bad.
Right.
And they don't know what they're talking about. They just went because they went to the rally because their friend told them to.
And then maybe they're conflating pro-Hamas for Palestine.
Exactly.
Israeli,
and they don't know what they're saying when they're saying from the river to the sea. They don't know what intifada means. They don't know, they don't know anything about the second intifada or what that meant for Israelis. That
goes back to your point on education.
On education, exactly. So that's why we're a primarily educational organization. So this involves, postering and info sessions, as well as having guest speakers. So last week we hosted Charlotte Korchak from Stand With Us, as well as Yoni Diller, who is a Nova massacre survivor.
Wow.
And we're going to be hosting the Palestinian human rights activist Bassem Eid in a few weeks. And we're just hoping to bring people to listen.
Yeah.
We just want people to come with open minds, to come and ask us questions. So yeah, that's the point of the Israel Alliance, is just to, show that we're not going to yell and lash out, but we are going to make our voices heard.
So time vaulting today, November 7th. Where are we at today? What's happening today? What's the feeling like?
Yeah. So including the other demonstrations that I mentioned by the Coalition Against Apartheid, I smile every time I say it because I just...
Ironic.
Yes. As you know, there is no Israel is not an apartheid state. It's just a silly name. For actually, the organization was created to protest against South African apartheid, which was a real apartheid.
Yeah.
And then the club got renewed recently to just be anti-Israel.
Yeah, I've heard that happen in a few different universities. Yeah.
So recently, members of this club went to the Misty Israel offices. So Misty is an
David Belovitz.
Exactly. So it's an internship program, and they have them at MIT, and it's for all the countries in the world, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, Misty Spain, Misty whatever. And they went to the Misty Israel offices and harassed the Misty Israel, I guess, directors there, and said, like, from the river to the sea, intifada, and they were trying to open doors. They were going from door to door trying to open doors. And I just spoke today to somebody who was in that office, an Israeli, and he said that he felt so scared to see these people trying to unlock doors, going from door to door. He felt like these are like the terrorists coming. They were from house to house, trying to open doors, trying to find people that were alive. Like, I don't think he feared for his life in that same way, but he was very fearful because he didn't know what they wanted, what they were going to do, why were they trying to unlock these doors. And this is happening on MIT's campus.
I saw a video of that protest inside the hallway. It was pretty aggressive, and it was loud, it was aggressive, it was very forceful. So I think that I would be scared. Yeah, being inside one of those rooms.
So the same people also were yelling outside of the daycare that's at MIT, and a lot of Israeli faculty and postdocs and even doctoral students who have children have their kids in this daycare, and they were called to take their kids home early. So it's really disruptive. It's been disruptive to people's academic and personal lives, of course. But I think people are feeling pretty unsafe because if they're, you know, visiting from Israel for 2 years for a program here, and they're living on a dorm on campus, they have their kid in the daycare on campus, they don't even feel safe. They don't feel like their kid is protected. They don't feel like their office is protected. And if they're living in a dorm on campus, they don't know if they're protected, if these people are allowed to roam around and harass people. So I think a lot of people are very nervous, about continued harassment like that.
And do we know how many Israeli or Jewish people are around MIT, and do we have any ballpark?
I don't know the numbers.
Must be in the hundreds at least, right?
Oh, certainly.
And I asked you this before we started recording, and you kind of looked at it and said, "What do you mean?" But I'll ask it again. Maybe I'll get the same response. Why you enter and spring into action and a leadership position into this conflict? It's heated conflict. You're obviously busy. You have a lot going on. I see that. Yet you chose to not just participate and to be an active member, but actually take a leadership role here. You mentioned personality, but I think that's too simple. Why, for you, is it important to take a leadership role here?
I think a few reasons. So I guess I was thinking to myself, 5 years from now, when I'm looking back on this time, what would I want to, what do I wish I would have done, I guess. And I think that if I had sat there and if I hadn't been an active participant in this work, as I mentioned, like, it matters to me so much how the people who are graduating from this institution going into very high power positions, how these people view Israel. That matters. And if I hadn't done anything, or if I, then I needed to know that I was doing what future Talia would want me to do. And also, I just think that it takes, I know you said you didn't want me to talk about the personality thing, but, I think I'm not Israeli. And I think that a lot of the Israelis were very, almost emotionally incapacitated by this. And as emotional as this is for me, the way that I am best able to deal with things is by doing something. And I felt like the best way to kind of harness everybody's emotional energy was to help organize everybody. And I felt like I was capable of that emotionally at that time. And I knew that a lot of people were just so sad. They couldn't leave their rooms. They were crying all the time. They couldn't stop looking at the news. They couldn't stop watching these videos. And like, I knew that the only way to serve them and get them out of this was to get everybody into action. And I was able to kind of have that wherewithal in that moment. And many others too, who comprise the executive board of the MIT Israel Alliance, were also able to do that. And it certainly wasn't all me. But yeah, I think it was just a combination of being able to kind of harness people's energy in a more productive way than just anger and sadness.
It's amazing. Thank you for both time here. I love how you're looking at it it sounds like you're looking at it way beyond this immediate time frame that we're in. Yes, there's the aspect of the protests, and there's this current experience and the current subjective experience of everybody, but with the way that you're talking about education in a broader sense, the way you're talking about future leadership, the way you're positioning the people here, the human capital that's at MIT, this, like what I call the sort of the beacon of intellectual rigor in the world. And you realize that these are people that, we're so, as humans, perhaps, we're so easily influenced when we don't know the complexity of the situation. We're so influenced by these narratives that through the creator economy and everything that's going on social. And these are people that are about to, that are graduating and going to be the next leaders across critical domains of the critical infrastructure of society. And it could be that because of these types of demonstrations that are often one-sided and don't tell the full story, they can leave MIT, still as the future tech leaders, but uneducated on what's happening. I think that's not something that I thought about when I thought we were going to talk about the MIT Israel Alliance, and it makes a lot of sense. So thank you for doing this and for the sacrifices you're making for it. And thanks for the great impact.
Thank you for that.